Neil. Can you all hear me okay? Everything good in the back? You're good? Okay, awesome. So thank you all so much for coming. I know that you've probably not heard enough about AI over the last couple of years, so I really appreciate you all being here. I do hope that you get something new out of this. I kind of have a different take on it a little bit, but what I'm hoping that you all get is when I talked to Neil about this, we talked about what people like in these, and so I tried to put all of those things in there, and like sometimes when you're sticking things in, they may not make sense. So if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to stop me. I don't mind. I will pause for questions, but also like just shout it out, raise your hand if you have any questions. So I'm Kristy Wedel, and I have about 20 years of experience in analytics in general. I started in AI probably about 10 years ago, just seemed like a good idea. And so that was, it was something that I kind of did on my own, but then I ended up finding a project that I could do. I was at Nationwide Children's Hospital at the time, and so it was just always something of interest to me, but like finding the right use cases was hard. Not everything is an AI use case, despite the fact that we're putting AI on everything. I just recently founded a company, ReMemora, and this, I founded it right around the time that I met Neil, but I'd spent most of my time in corporate America, and then before founding my own company, I also worked at a startup called Align AI, and it took me 2 years from the first time that they asked me to actually join the startup because I was terrified. And so once I joined the startup, things did what they do in startups, and they changed a lot. And so that process and what happened there was kind of what led me to the idea for this talk. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the behind the scenes, not too much, but I feel like it really kind of adds to like some of the context behind this. But before I get off this slide, I'm also a member of the Women in Analytics team. I'm organizing the TEDx Worthington Women event. So if any of you are interested in attending, love to see you. It's April 9th. And I'm also a doctoral student at Franklin University. I also went to OSU. I did not put on here. I went to Columbus State as well. So Columbus State, Ohio State, and then Franklin and Franklin. So I want to talk about business and technology because this is actually from the conference this week, the AI Columbus conference. And a lot of people we're looking at AI from the tech side of things. We're like, we just want to put AI into everything. We're not really sure exactly where it goes, but we know it automates, it speeds up things. But there's been this friction between business and technology for decades, really as long as technology has existed. And so if you can't see it, it says 84% of organizations report failed initiatives due to a poor solution fit. So if you think about AI and the thing that I'm saying about we're putting AI in everything, clearly it does not go in everything. And so with that frame in mind, I think that it makes sense to try it. You know, we're all kind of experimenting, but if at first you don't succeed, there may be other ways to do this. One of the most interesting things that I've seen is that when people try to put AI into these different processes, they're actually finding simple solutions to things that they've struggled with for years. One example, and I won't name the company because they didn't tell me I could, so is that they were trying to redesign basically how they were getting their manufactured goods into their processing plant. And they were like, we could definitely use AI for this. And so they took a look at their process. And it turned out it had to do with the time that the materials were sitting. So they had basically an average of 24 days that the materials just sat there and did nothing, and they were paying for them. And so they were like, if we just did that, like a little bit like less of a gap there, like maybe it was like 14 days instead of 24, we'd save millions of dollars. There was no AI involved, but there's so much value in us reevaluating our processes. And so to me, I think that's what AI can help us do, is not necessarily automate, but change how we're viewing things. I mean, in this case, they didn't use AI at all, but I think in some cases that may be how we get to those ideas, is to kind of bounce different topics off of each other and AI and kind of dig into it a little bit more. So the core of this talk is around how we can do AI better. And I want to have a takeaway. So I have a framework I'm going to share with you on how you can do that. And it applies to any tool. So whether you're using ChatGPT or developing your own coding solution, you can do this as long as you're prompting. And then there's kind of this bigger concept about the business and technology gap that we have, in that I feel like it's not constrained to, I mean, obviously not one organization or another, but this is the first time that I'm gonna open up for questions, and I did not give anyone a heads up. So Neil, I don't know if you're ready for, but I wanted to get from the audience any comments or thoughts, experiences that you've had around this gap or where you're seeing it. And it can come from either side. Like if you are the person where technology is being pushed on you, what has that experience been like? Or if you're from the tech side, like what have you seen? Would love to hear from a few of you if you wouldn't mind sharing any. Everyone's got kind of, you know, the different components of things where like there's just this gap still, and it's so early in this evolution of AI. And you know, just as framework, like where I stand on this, I'm very much a realist when it comes to AI, but I do see the power. I see, you know, a lot of the opportunity, and I use it very frequently, like all day. But I also, you know, run into those same issues that you all have. And so the story behind the story of like where this idea came from, it's like I've spent my career trying to make, you know, technology work for the business and vice versa. And I didn't realize until recently how weird my career was. Like, you know, there's people that they know they're weird, but I was one of those that was like, I didn't know I was weird. And so it happened around that time when I was trying to transition from the startup I had joined. And I didn't have to apply for the startup, it just happened. So it had been a minute since I had to apply for jobs. And what I found when I applied for jobs was people looked at my resume and were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm helping the business work with technology. And it was like, well, to do that effectively, there's like so many different skills you have to bring in. You have to understand, you know, how the business is working. You have to meet with them. You have to deal with the change management. You know, there's organizational leadership, then there's design theory, and then there's analytics, and then there's AI, and like all of these things. And so I had, depending on the projects that I was involved in, done all of those. And so they just kept asking, like, you know, it's like, okay, like, what are your goals? And I'm like, I want to do this. So anyway, what the moment that this talk came up for me, it was actually came from an epiphany, which is a funny thing because you know, it's a weird conversation to be like, well, I had this really big idea, it was an epiphany, but it happened after having, unfortunately, not gotten a job that I spent a lot of time interviewing for, and was just like looking back at all of the things that I'd done and trying to figure out like what could I do going forward. I'm sharing all of this because it's very aligned to like what happened here. And so the way that I've approached my career is really, I like to problem solve. So the skills that I acquired, it was like, I think a lot of people pick a lane. They're like, I'm gonna do analytics, and they, you know, do data science or whatever. For me, I wanted to help these people work better together. So anyway, so when I didn't get this job, I was just kind of lost because I was like, basically they told me I didn't get the job because I didn't stay in the lane. And then I heard that from another company and another company and another company. And it was something where I'm sure you've all seen it when organizations will hire somebody, they're looking to fit a particular role. And it makes total sense. There's no judgment. I completely understand. But I guess it was like the moment that I had was I was like, well, I don't. And I'm like, but I want to go back to corporate. You know, I was like, Control Z, undo, no startups. And I couldn't because I was like, well, I don't fit in corporate. So I'm like, I guess I give up then. I don't know. I'm having a midlife crisis. So anyway, how that ties into this idea was the epiphany happened after that. And I did research on like how those things work and realized that those really big insights, like tying this to business, like not personal things, but business, like even if you're thinking about insight, those big moments come from when your core beliefs are completely disrupted. Like I believed I was in a safe industry. I had, you know, done the things I needed to do. I was a good worker. I like all those things. And so I was trying to avoid being unemployed, and it turns out there's actually no way to avoid that. Sometimes it just happens. And after having faced that fear, I was no longer afraid of it. And so I could just move on and realize like there was still an opportunity to keep going forward. So this talk is all about how AI can help us get there faster. And so that's where I see the future of this, is that right now we're in a space of like automating what we currently do, but what if we could help shift our mindset so that we're not operating in these silos of like business versus technology, but truly find the opportunity and like have people work together. So that's what this talk is about, but it does have frameworks, because I'm like, I didn't want people to walk away and be like, well, that's really inspiring, now what? So I do have that in there, and then I also have some ideas on use cases and things like that. But this is, my slide got messed up, but that's okay. So this is some of the things that I've learned along the way in this mission of trying to bridge the two together. The main things I want to point out, I won't go through all of these, are that storytelling, linguistics are a really powerful way for us to communicate. And when you think about it from AI, you know how ChatGPT is like, good job to everything you say, and then it's like, you say the opposite, and it's like, exactly, and then you just keep going. And like, it's the way that we think about it. And so that was one of the really interesting things I've learned just in the research, is that even these language models, the language going in there is shaping our reality, because if you only have a limited view based on the language that you know or the way that it's coming back at you, your perception is changing, and it applies to leadership. But I don't know if you've all ever heard of how Eskimos have, like, I'm not gonna quote the right number, but they have 17 different ways to say snow. And so when they look at snow, they're looking at like, oh, it's this kind of snow day or that kind of snow day, and I'm looking at, I wish it was summer. And so there's actually a project out there to use AI to combine different languages and like map them together. And it's fascinating, because it's like, what could we do if we weren't limited by our own language? Like, what would that look like? And it's like mind-bending, but there is a project doing that. And so I see the value in AI, but I see the stumbling blocks. And so that's what this talk is about. But change management, AI is hard. It's really hard. It's very different from what we're used to. And so this video that I put at the bottom here, Simon Sinek, and he had the law of diffusion and innovation, and talking about how change in organizations, or even if it's just changes that you want to make, how that works. And it really starts with small movements. So you don't have to get everybody's buy-in. You just need to find a few people, and then it just kind of takes off. So what he talked about was in larger organizations where I spent most of my career, the innovators, the first early adopters, they're the ones that drive the change. Most people, the vast majority, don't want to change anything. They just want to come in and do their job and leave. I have no idea why. Like, to me, that's like, my husband tells me there's people that just want to complain, and I'm like, I don't know why. But yeah, it doesn't matter if you have the right idea and it's working, you can still move things forward. So with AI, change management is number one. I did some research on what the failures for AI proof of concepts are, and 70% of them come down to a lack of support or change management from leadership in the larger organizations. So it really is key. Like, we hear about the data quality and things like that, and those are very important, but the change management is even more so, and just like that support. But yeah, so many things go into this. I will talk about it more later. I guess one other thing to call out here is the technology and systems thinking. And I'm sorry that my slide got messed up, but it's the way we develop technology, I feel like, is almost backwards. So we created computers, and then we were like, what can computers do? And then we started building on top of it and layering on it. And we just kind of said people need to adapt to the computers. And so we made these different interfaces. And one of the issues with doing that, though, is that you may never actually make a system that's functioning the way that you want it to. So when I talk about this business technology divide, I'm not saying that one is right or wrong. And to be honest, I think both of them have really good points. I almost feel like it's really just that we need to kind of rethink how the systems work in general, and that AI can be a part of it, but it can also make it worse. So that's a lot of that. Trying to create human-centric redesigns, and again, I think that just going back to the start of what do we even need from computers? Like, what do we want it to do? And the trouble that I see people running into is that if they go use ChatGPT and they want to receive a result, they're used to Google. That's what they are familiar with. And so you would go into Google and you would ask a question, how do I blank? And it would provide you with a series of results. And if you did that to Gen AI, it would aggregate, and you may or may not know if it's right when you look at it. And so the trust aspect comes into it. And depending on the model that you're using, you may very well be right to question it. A lot of them are not as accurate as we'd like them to be. But going forward, understanding our place in this workflow, I think, is the most important thing. And I think this process had to happen this way. We had to try it out and see, like, where did it fit and what do we need to do. But going forward, it really is about helping us get the information that we need when we need it, because it's not something where we want to replace people. Another side story of how I even learned how to code. It wasn't what I went to school for. I went and got a math degree, but I wanted to do computer programming and I failed it, so I gave up. And when I had my first job, I had to do a lot of like moving data from one place to another, and I hated it. It was so boring, and I was like, what if I forget something or whatever? So I learned how to code to do that, and then to copy programs and do other things, and then eventually spent a lot of time like automating like web development and testing and things like that. But I learned to code to automate. Like, I very much see the value in that, but that's been around forever. And so to me, looking at AI as automation, I don't see that as its real opportunity, because it's not deterministic. You don't know if you're going to get the right answer or not, whereas like some of the other automation tools are more, and you can actually like plan out what it's going to look like. So it is automation, but it's not automation. It just looks different. I want to explain a little bit of the background of how we got here, because just like my story of how this talk came to be, a lot of this is why things are the way that they are. So the Turing test, probably many of you have seen this before, but it was a way to determine how intelligent computers were, and I use it because that's how he did it, but it was a benchmark. And if any of you have heard of AGI, hands? Yeah, okay. So it's like artificial general intelligence, and there's no like actual real benchmark for that, and the reason is because what does it mean to be smart, and which one of you have it? Does everyone have it? Does no one have it? Like, there's no specific benchmark. People may be good at math, they might be good at writing, reading, you know, there's a lot of specialization, so it's really challenging to actually determine whether AI has this or doesn't have it. But the Turing test was a benchmark, and there are other benchmarks for this. And then at that time, the term AI did not exist. But John McCarthy went and brought a group together. They had the Dartmouth conference, and that was where they named the field artificial intelligence. They named it because they wanted it to be distinct from some of the other ones around that time period, like cybernetics and some of the other fields that were they were computer-based, but not specifically around this. And then the 1960, Joseph Weizenbaum, he developed ELIZA. And this was the first chatbot. It used something called symbolic AI, which is not the same as generative AI, the LLMs that we're using, and like generally what I'll refer to as AI in this talk. But it was a psychotherapist, and so he developed it to have basically like a predefined response pattern, and people tried it out. There were issues with it, but one of the most interesting things, which we still see today with AI, was that his secretary, who knew it was a program, became emotionally attached to ELIZA because it sounded human. And it was empathetic, as a psychotherapist programmed, program. And so she knew it was a program, but she still became emotionally attached. And it's that same anthropomorphizing that we see with ChatGPT. And it's not something anyone should try to stop. It's a very human thing that we do. It's more just like being aware of it and knowing like the computer is programmed to do things, and even Gen AI is as well. It just works slightly different from other computer programs. Like it doesn't have the same logic patterns as other programs, but it is programmed similar to Eliza, and that's why, I don't know if you've all tried some of the newer GPTs, like ChatGPTs, like the 5, I think has this, where they've been less sycophantic, meaning like if you're talking to them and doing that, like good job, great job, all of those things, they're trying to do that less so that you don't end up in this spiral of like reinforcing, bad activities or things like that, because there's all kinds of mental health concerns. So, and there's this huge gap, 1960 to 2017, tons of work happened during that time period, but a lot of it was more invisible to people, like they didn't hear about it a lot. And there's even like cycles, they call them AI winters, where we get really excited about AI and then less excited. And so a lot of that happened throughout the time period. And it has to do with the difference between neural networks, symbolic AI, and like how neither one of them is quite perfect. So symbolic AI is essentially trying to abstract logic so that you could say like, well, if it's raining today, then you might want an umbrella or something like that. But the generative AI takes patterns. You give it input and output, like I have this and I want that output, and it learns the patterns. And so that is very unique to that versus other computer programs, but obviously can go off the rails. We've seen hallucinations, and it does not have necessarily the best idea of what truth looks like. So the paper Attention is All You Need came out in 2017, and that was from a number of Google scientists. It was the foundational work for a thing called transformers, and that was what enabled us to be able to create today's Gen AI. And then it became very popular. It was November 2022 with the release of ChatGPT, and obviously the rest up until now. This book that I have, The Empire of AI, I had an opportunity to go meet the author in Boston back in, I think it was May or June. It's a fascinating backstory. She's a journalist, but she embedded inside of OpenAI. So her book is all about like some of the stuff that goes on went on, I guess, previously in OpenAI, and like how they think about it. And it's really interesting. It is very, she has an opinion, and you'll know the opinion in the book, but it's very interesting nonetheless. So the reason that it happened, the 3 main components were lots of data. That's why this didn't happen back in the 60s. We have so much data, and we have a lot of computing power, and then the transformer was the key piece. Oops. So current trends, and I thought I would share this because if you don't do some of these, this is how a lot of people are using generative AI. The number one thing is therapy and companionship, which if you think about Eliza, makes sense that that's what people are doing with it. The challenge, though, is that there's not enough guardrails for if someone is struggling or using it in a way where they actually need more robust assistance and things like that. There's not enough there. But it makes sense. Like it can talk to you and help with different ideas, and so I think that there's a limit to how much it can do, but it definitely makes sense that you would do something like that. And learning is another good one. So I do have some other slides later about how I see potential evolution in learning and advanced institutions, higher education institutions. Did any of you see or know about OSU? And they just started an AI program. I see you're nodding. So yeah, they everyone has to take AI, I think was the initiative. Okay, so there's a course where, you know, to kind of address the education piece on like how to use it, how not to use it, I assume is the purpose of that, but there's definitely a lot there because if you do this like cognitive offloading where you say, I just do the task for me, you know, you're losing that critical thinking skill and all of that, but there potentially are opportunities to make your thinking even deeper if you use it the right way. So I don't know what their class has in it, but I would be curious. So I already kind of said this, but my hypothesis is that the biggest opportunity with Gen AI is not automation, but in redesigning our processes. But I really wanted to understand why we're so obsessed with AI. You know, like why is it that we just keep trying to do so much AI? And we started with the solution and we're working backwards. And from a systems design perspective, obviously, you know, that's bad. But the reason that I believe we're doing this is that there's tons of research saying that we spend a lot of our time searching for information. And so that leads to productivity loss and frustration and burnout. And this is like, it's a personal issue, you know, even if you're in your typical day-to-day, just trying to, all your alerts that you're getting and the emails, and like, we're very overwhelmed by data. And so I think that we see AI as the solution to this. And I think it's both. It is both the solution and potentially going to make it worse. So the reason that I say that is that if there's a lack of clarity on whether it's providing the right information or the wrong information, I think that we will continue to struggle with this. In fact, it continues to generate more information. And my husband was talking, I tell lots of stories about him because he's like, stop talking about AI. But he was like, what if they start training, you know, the next GPTs on the output from the chat? And he's like, then won't it just have like more garbage on more garbage? And I was like, exactly, yes, that would be bad. So there's a common thread between our challenges and what we're seeing as challenges in Gen AI. So those tab hoarding, desktops of doom, SharePoint, graveyard, data swamp, all of those are related to hallucinations, knowledge gaps, bias, context limitations, and reasoning gaps, et cetera. They're indirectly related to governance and explainability, but they're very similar. So the reason I'm saying they're similar is that there's this concept of an insight gap where we have lots of data, but we can't find what we need. You know, it's like we should be able to, but we can't. And some of the key contributors are these silos, the business versus technology, academia versus industry, within organizations like businesses, you know, infighting, and then process failure. We have logs of what happened, but we don't track why. We don't track why we made a decision. So we decided to go this path. And then I have an example, so I won't dig into it too much, but we didn't connect the dots there from the outcome to the decision. We sometimes do it in our head. Sometimes we're wrong, but we very rarely write it into a system. So if you think about that right there, it's not in the data that the AI is using. And so that's where some of this problem comes from. And then I already talked about how we built systems and then told people they had to adapt. But our tools are fragmented and we're not connecting them. And so like having the whole story, like truly having that understanding is challenging in those bigger problems because they come from different domains. Like it might not just be a marketing problem, it could be marketing, sales, you know, our strategy, like all the things. This quote I have from John Naisbitt, it was, we're drowning in information and starved for knowledge. It was from 1982, and we have not solved it yet. The insight gap, this is my theory, is what we actually want AI to solve. We don't want it to automate our job. We just want to find the information that we know is there somewhere. which it kind of is, but we're also missing that really key piece. So 90% of our knowledge is tacit. We didn't document it. So it's not just we didn't write down that one decision. It's all of the culture within an organization. It's that person that they documented it one time, but then the process changed 5 times after that. It's just not in a system. So we have all of this data, and we don't know what to get rid of because we're just hoarding the wrong data. And this is what it looks like. So we have a PowerPoint, we go to a presentation, and there's a bunch of people sitting around a table, and they have a discussion. Somebody comes in and they're like, yeah, I understand the data, looks like that, but also I heard this from one of our customers, and then I was talking to our other executive, and I'm like, we're gonna go this way. We write out the action items, we send an email, and the action items probably get done, but the actual reasoning process behind why we didn't do what the data said is very rarely captured. So when you walk that back, if you ever wanted to understand later why that decision was made, we didn't capture it. And we may misremember, as our memories are not infallible, but we also may not be able to learn from that in the future. So that is the context elephant. So I really messed up my slides a little bit. So the business is assuming that AI can fix it because it can process the documents, but it doesn't have the information to connect the documents to the actual outcomes or understanding where it came from. And then we do need AI to be competitive. It's very true. Like that's what, if you were to be talking to your shareholders and saying, oh, we're not going to do AI, they would be like, well, you don't want a job. And then in academia, a lot of the times when we're developing these experiments, they do work well in the short term, but once you take it to the real world, context it's living, it's changing, it's moving. And so the more it changes, there's the concept of drift, but it's bigger than just data drift. It's really this context drift. Data engineers have a different view, data scientists, kind of similar to academia, and then startups. The overall theme in startups is that you start small and you scale. So again, if you're starting small, when the context is controlled in an experiment and then just keep going, it does seem to get better until you try to think about the hierarchy and the cultures and all of the different democratic processes that we have. It gets very challenging. So I'm not saying that it doesn't work at all, because clearly it does. We're using it. What I'm saying is I think that there's a crucial gap that we need to track the why, and that will help us so that we can be able to use Gen AI better, but also help us to think better. The challenges, a lot of these you all are familiar with, but I wanted to clarify about the context, because there's a lot of solutions out there that help, but they're just not getting to the core of the problem, which is we need to save that context. And so when you use ChatGPT, it does save some of it. But if you've ever had a really long conversation, you may have noticed that it starts to degrade. And the reason is, it might be too small, but it's like there's a perfect amount of context. And if you have that, it will give you the right answer. But as you keep going, it starts to get fuzzier and fuzzier. And so we need a system managing that, because LLMs won't be able to overcome that, because you can't just give it more. You need to give it the right amount. So this is what my company does, but also it really has nothing to do with needing a software solution to do it. It's actually something that every individual can do by themselves. And so that's the framework that I'll share. But you can basically just, in tracking some of the important context, like if you've ever, I go to coffees and I always have all these good ideas, and then I leave. If I don't write it down, I move on and I forget the next thing. So it's more like changing the way that we behave so that we can track some of these more important things, which will ultimately lead to us being less overwhelmed in the first place. So this is my framework. This was the thing that I absolutely had to have in here, because I was like, I don't want you to leave without anything. And Go Frame Link is taking all of these different concepts and trying to make them actionable at a personal level, so you don't need another tool to do this. I've done a lot of training on Copilot and some of the other tools with organizations, and found that although there are lots of frameworks out there, that people, when they sit down to write the prompt, they're just confused. They're just like, I don't remember what the letters were. I don't know what I need in there, which is why I shared the story that I did, so that if you have a simpler one, it might work. So Go would be for 80% of the queries that you're making, the prompts that you're writing. You just need what you're looking for, what the goal is, which is the thing that you would have typed into Google. But then you also need context, however much you can add to it. So the overview is like the background there. And what it does is it prevents you from cognitively offloading, because it helps you to think about your process and why it is that you're doing it in the first place. Whereas from Google, you just said go, and it served you the results back. So that's the flip there. Frame is more in depth. This is where you can get a lot deeper with AI. And if you want to get it like structured exploration, and you don't just want to like have one response, but maybe it's going to be a conversation, this is leveraging Socratic questioning methods to help you with your decision quality. So asking better questions and trying to think more deeply, potentially questioning your own bias that you might have, like how else could I think of this? That's that framework. And then the last one is to capture it. So whether it's I had a great prompt, whether you got a great response, whether you had a meeting, whatever it is, capture those things so that you can reuse them. You can actually just drop them into your next ChatGPT session. So like if you're about to meet with somebody and you had coffee with them last time, just like pull up, all of the notes that you had, the important pieces, and then like have it help you aggregate. And that limits it. So you don't have to constantly like go find it or remember some of the more menial details, but also continue to question the way that you're doing it. I won't read all of these, and I'm happy to show the slides as well if you want to try these out, but generally the difference here would just be to optimize for better human thinking and reduce that cognitive offloading. And then frame. These three different examples here are marketing campaign, strategic planning, and problem solving. I will read one of these just because it's a little more detailed. So I'll start with the marketing campaign. Should we use curiosity or urgency-based subject lines for re-engagement? And then reveal would be our inactive customer segment hadn't purchased in 6 months. Articulate, we're just expanding. We've got different options that we've been thinking about. Which one we want to kind of like play it out, see what would happen. And then when you start questioning, like what might we be missing? That would be the mind section. What is our brand voice? What's our customer psychology? How could we do it differently? And then the last one there, given our professional audience and brand positioning, how can we predict the chance of success? Yours don't have to look anything like this. These are just components, different things you can think about. The concept being trying to figure out how you can think differently about it, having it tell you, like provide sources, like trying to see how you could then further your research, like maybe it's the stepping point. So I made these in Canva and then exported, and that was clearly a mistake. But this is kind of the whole point of my talk, is that context is the point. AI is not the point. AI is a tool, it's a process. Context is the memory, it's the why we did it, it's what we did, it's how we learn. So this quote that I have, without memory, there's no history. Without history, there's no context. Without context, there is no meaning. And so all of the logs of data and the millions of cat pictures and everything else, they're fine. That's what the internet is for, cat pictures. But context is the whole point. It's our story about why we do what we do. And it's a very different way of thinking about it. And I very much anticipate, as we head down this path, that people may be concerned about what will people think, or like if I'm sharing like why you made that decision. But I will tell you that I've never been in a meeting where someone shared an idea where they were deliberately trying to do the wrong thing, or that they were trying to sabotage something, or that they weren't doing the best with the information they had. What I actually think is happening is that because we don't track why we did something, that we are never able to actually go back and like appropriately learn and improve the process, because it's not your fault that you didn't know that thing that no one knew. So I think that's what we'll find, is that it probably makes more sense for people to just kind of think about like how they could think about this like in their own like individual lives, but there's also like levels in organizations where this would be really useful. And you know, what they track or how they track, like there's lots of different options. Like, it doesn't have to be everything, just anything at all would be helpful. The main thing, I guess, would be think about it as an imperfect tool, and think about how you can use it, but then also like, you know, don't take it like at its word. You know, ChatGPT, if you receive a response and you're not sure, you know, go look it up in different sources, try a different tool, you know, continue to evolve, and then find what works for you. You know, that, I mean, I 100% agree. Don't, you know, use any of the things that don't make sense for what it is that you want to do in here, but there's so much opportunity as long as, you know, we use it in the right way.
Thank you.
Thank you.